today's lesson, sewing lesson, is on picking your fabrics. Now, fabric comes on a bolt. That's what it looks like. Here on the end of the bolt, you have really important information that you need to know. It doesn't always end up in the same place on the bolt, but all of this information is on the end of the bolt someplace. This is a Riley Blake fabric. That's the name of the company. It's Sidewalks. So that's the designer named this collection of fabric Sidewalks. And so there is matching fabric, that coordinates with this in the collection. Now, you do not have to stay within a collection if you're putting fabrics together, because you can see lots of things would go with this. But if you wanted to have, if you're making a quilt or something like that, and you wanted to have a lot of fabrics that you knew coordinated with this, look in the Sidewalks collection. So that's how that works. All right. This number here, the pattern number, that's telling me the designer and the company said this is the number for this particular piece of fabric. So for example, if I wanted to find this fabric online someplace and find all of the coordinating pieces to it, I would type in Riley Blake and then that number, and I could see what was available. A really important piece of information is right here. It tells me that it's 43 to 44 inches wide. Okay, so some fabrics are 60 inches wide, some are 90 inches wide. Like quilt backing sometimes can come up to 108 inches wide. So it's important to know what width it is. Now, it used to be all fabric like this was considered, you just call it 45-inch wide fabric because it all used to be 45 inches, but like everything, they keep shrinking it down. So this is 43 to 44 inches. This is 100% cotton, which means there are no additional things. It's just cotton. Sometimes you'll see 50% cotton, 50% polyester, okay? There's pluses and minuses to that. Then another really important piece of information that you need to pay attention to when you buy fabric. This is machine wash cold, tumble dry low. So I can put that in the washer and the dryer. It tells me to remove it promptly, not to use chlorine bleach. It tells me it's flammable. And what that means is the next sentence, flammable, not intended for use in children's sleepwear. There's federal laws about children's sleepwear needs to have a flame retardant added to it, and that it was made in Korea. It tells me the color, and it tells me how many yards originally came on this bolt. So for most people, you don't need to know that. So that's what a bolt of fabric has on the end of it, and all bolts of fabric have this information. Okay, I'm going to talk really quickly. There are lots of different kinds of fabrics, but two of the main categories are woven, which is what this is. So do you remember when you used to see a little weaving loom and they would just weave the fabric? That's woven fabric. If you've ever used knitting needles and knitted, that's what knit fabric is, and you can see it stretches much more than a woven fabric. Now, a lot of people are afraid to sew with knit fabric, and you shouldn't be, but it's a different skill set, and you do things just a little bit differently, and we're not going to be dealing with knit during our beginning sewing lessons. We're going to be dealing just with woven fabrics. Now, fabric comes off of the bolt. It's folded on this side, and then there's the two edges over here. This is called a salvage edge of your fabric. And if you could see it, you could see that it's woven just a little tighter. And then a lot of that information that's on the end of your bolt is printed along the salvage edge over here. Okay. Now, when you're purchasing a woven fabric, there's a couple things that you need to pay attention to. If it's 100% cotton, when you wash it, it will shrink. Fabrics shrink a little bit from side to side this way. They shrink the most along the salvage edge. So what that means is if you're making a top or especially like a pair of pants, they always go this way, the long way. That's when you lay out your pattern for your pants. And so if you don't pre-wash and dry your fabric and you make your pants exactly the length that you want them to be, once you wash them, they'll be too short. So keep that in mind. You should probably always pre-wash and dry your fabrics, unless you're making a quilt, because there's certain reasons you don't do that when you're making a quilt, but that's not what we're doing today. Okay, the other thing I wanted to point out is I love this fabric. I think it's just adorable. But if you notice, it's called a directional fabric. Every single piece of it, this is the top and this is the bottom. So this is the head of the duck and the feet of the duck, the head of the girl and the feet of the girl. A lot of fabrics, the designers do it so that there is no right side up or upside down. This one they did. So when I'm laying out my pattern pieces, like here's my pattern for just a little diaper cover. I have to be sure that I keep that in mind, because if I did it one right side up and the other side upside down, it would not work. You would have your outfit with the print going upside down. So that's called a directional fabric, and so you need to look at that when you're looking at your fabrics. All right, let's talk for just a second about patterns. All right. Somewhere on your pattern, you'll always have something called a grain line, and it's usually an arrow. All right, and you always have the arrow, the grain line, run perpendicular to your selvage or your fold. Okay, so this would go this way on this fabric. You wouldn't put it this way. All right, so you want the selvage edge and the grain line to be running the same. So that's an important piece to know. So anyway, your homework for this lesson is to go to the fabric store and look at the labels on your fabric, and you'll find that most fabric stores today tend to cater to quilters. That's who is doing the most sewing right now. And their 100% cotton fabrics are all over the store, and there's usually big collections that are just wonderful. So that would be your homework for today, is to look at and read some labels on the bolts. So until next time, this is Cindy from Vintage to New.